Guys, we'll get started here. Individuals on Zoom, give me a thumbs up if you are able to hear me. Perfect. All right, so relatively short lecture today, along with a little interactive activity just to get you all prepped for exam number 1, which will open up next week. You guys will have a weekend to complete and no class. Just to reiterate, exam 1 is or should be a review for you all. All right, this is, I'm having an exam this early just to prep you guys up. Just make sure that you guys are familiar with the terminology that will be reinforced as we go throughout the human body. So before we get started, just to organize ourselves, today is August 30th. We'll go over general concepts of movement. Again, this should be a review. We also have our corresponding quiz 2, which is due by next Thursday at 11:59. All of you should have completed quiz 1 by now, correct? Cool. So. Let's see, also, I didn't get a chance to really go over the extra credit stuff. So if you guys were here last week, or if you guys watched the recordings, I had some fellow PhD colleagues of mine come and present their research. By no means is that the only ongoing research that's going on within the college at large. And their new study being developed and getting off the ground pretty much every couple weeks. So I'll try my best to update the module out as I go in terms of extra credit opportunities specifically related to the study participation. But I may be a little slow, so I encourage you guys to follow this website as well, because that will have the most up-to-date opportunities for you guys to potentially participate. And it's also nice because along with the detailed description, it gives more detail related to the estimated time of commitment, whether it's compensate, whether you guys will be compensated or not, which is pretty important, at least for me. We'll also be on the lookout for that. I also want to bring your attention to the fall seminar series. There's actually one going on here at 11. So I'll try my best to kind of get through the content. And if you guys want to hop on, it's actually on campus in the PA building from 11 to 11:45 for 12. I'm not trying to get you guys out of here, but I think opportunities like that are just as important than the content that you're learning here. But even if you miss that one, there will be a couple more for you all to attend. There's also a Zoom option. And I'll post the Zooms as I receive them, and they should be readily available somewhere, but I'll make sure to have that posted on there and give you guys a heads up for you guys to engage in that opportunity. So as long as you attend at least 3 of those, there may be more than 4 this semester, but all I'm looking for is just 3. And again, these seminars are essentially research presentations from various professionals within the College of Health Professions and Sciences. So outside of just your typical kinesiologist researcher perspective, you'll have clinicians, you'll have research directors, you'll have individuals working in various roles in hospitals. So again, this is meant to broaden your horizons in regards to career opportunities in the field. Any questions, comments, and concerns before we get started? Well, also, I really appreciated the level of engagement last class. I was definitely by far one of the best I've had really in my time here, and that's saying a lot because I've been here way too long. But let's keep the momentum going. Again, there will be like a little shift after this lecture. Following the exam next week, you guys will have an online lecture, which is over the joints of the face, I'm assuming. More so like the skull and the jaw joints and all that good stuff. And then from there, we'll get on to our other study areas. Any questions, comments, concerns before we get started?
Quick question, if you
Yes.
say online lecture, is it like you're posting a recording?
Yeah, so I'm posting an online lecture. So every time that occurs, we won't have class.
Yeah.
Alright, so the only caveat is I just like to organize the information accordingly. I just don't make it available so you guys can binge it in one day and that's it. I just want you guys to pace yourselves accordingly, but yeah, the goal here is to be as flexible with the content as possible, and it's nice because you guys will have this video essentially for your entire life as you so choose to download it. And use as a nice foundational reference for when you engage in your further education or out there practicing in the field, whatever discipline you so choose. All right. Are we ready to go? Any questions, comments, concerns? Again, student template notes should be up and available. For the purpose of this lecture, I'll actually have you guys moving quite a bit. I think it's rather important for you guys taking notes on movements, especially as us being kinesiologists. So again, this is recorded for you guys. So anything you missed, you're more than welcome to rewatch the recording, if for nothing else, just to fill in the blanks. And of course, exams, you are able to use your student template notes. And it's also nice here because oftentimes when you repeatedly like refer back to the text, there's some reinforcement in the concepts there. So that is done intentionally. All right, starting off here with movements. Again, this will be a relatively short lecture. This should all be a review. The most important thing when we discuss movements or how movement is discussed in the clinical as well as practical spaces is making sure that you have some sort of reference point. I think that's the most important thing that you should take away from this lecture. Everything else is really terminology and you guys will get that. But the foundational concepts is before you use any sort of anatomical terminology, there has to be a particular reference point. If you don't have the reference point or if you don't have a reference position, then oftentimes you'll get confused. All right. So in terms of the references position, we primarily have two. By showing hands, how many of you guys are familiar with the anatomical and functional position, right? So for fundamental position, also call it. The fundamental position is just the position that we are usually engaged in, especially while we move. However, just to keep everything standardized from a anatomical terminology descriptive point of view, everything is referred based off of a particular landmark's location based off the anatomical position. I want everybody to stand up for me, please. I'll let you know this now, like a lot of these things, you may think, man, this is corny, but literally, my only job is to keep you guys awake. That's it. All right. So I want everybody to stand in anatomical position for me. Anatomical position. Your palms are facing forward. Your feet are around hip width apart. And this is very important because you'll notice particular patterns and ambiguity in these terms. All right. Again, don't worry about the bolded text. You guys will get that either on the recording, but again, this should be a review. As I mentioned, the anatomical position is the main reference position that is used whenever we introduce anatomical terminology. It's considered that all these joints are neutral here in this position. All right. So now what I want everybody to do is I want you guys to find a partner, but it has to be somebody that you've never met before. right, go. I'll give you guys a minute to get acclimated. Tell each other what you guys do, what's their hobbies, what's your aspirations.
Around the house.
All right, you guys, let's get back. 1, 2, 3, eyes. All right, guys, let's reconvene. All right, you guys, so as I mentioned before, whenever you use these anatomical terminology, you have to make sure that you are using it based off of a particular reference point, all right? Can you guys see my red pointer? Yeah. All right. So for the first 4 terms, the reference point will be the umbilicus. Do we all know what the umbilicus is? Your belly button, all right? So I want everybody to just blurt out, or you guys can reconvene with your newfound friend. Just name some general anatomical things that are superior to the umbilicus. And go, just talk amongst yourselves. What's superior to the umbilicus? Anything, what's superior to the umbilicus?
Yeah.
All right, now name some things that are inferior to the umbilicus. Inferior to the umbilicus. All right, you guys, let's reconvene. Next reference point will be your cheekbone. I want everybody to point to your cheekbone. All right. Now I want you guys with your partner to identify something that is anterior to the cheekbone. And we're looking at it at the sagittal plane. Oh, okay, I lost you guys. All right. So, man, I have you say just like this for me. Cheekbone. So anything anterior to the reference point, it just means a structure that is in front of the reference point. All right. Anything posterior to the reference point is any structure that is behind the reference point. Does that make sense? Yeah. All right. So again, we're not looking at it from like more superficial to deep. Typically, the anterior posterior nomenclature is applied in the sagittal perspective. So now talk to your partner and identify anything that is anterior to the cheekbone. Anterior. I got a pretty big nose, man. I hate to say it. Right. You only focus on the face, up and down, and see nothing fine.
Yeah.
Alright, now identify something that's posterior to
Maybe.
Alright, you guys, let's get back to your show. If you notice here, and you notice on your student template notes, all of the bolded words are words that are typically used in the field, alright? All of the non-bolded words are essentially synonyms, okay? So for example, superior is everything or anything above a particular reference point. You can also use the word cranial or cephalic, and that just means towards the head. You won't really see that, but that's also a synonymous term with superior. Same thing with caudal and inferior. Now, for the ventral and dorsal aspects, those correspond to anterior and posterior nomenclature. You typically won't find this in musculoskeletal terminologies per se. It's more so applied when we look deeper in the structure. A prime example is the nerve roots that correspond to our sensory and our motor functions, right? All of the nerve roots that return any sort of sensory information to our spinal cord, it typically happens at the dorsal horn, all right? So, you guys may be familiar because you took anatomy, but typically with your vertebrae and your nerve roots, the characteristics of these nerve endings are shaped like horns, like double horns, if you will. So the horns or the nerve roots that return information to the back or the dorsal aspect of those horns are relaying primarily sensory and proprioceptive information, all right? Conversely, all the nerves that leave out of the front horns, also as ventral, those primarily relay signals to allow us to engage in voluntary movement. Does that make sense? But also in this terminology, it can also be synonymous with anterior and posterior. All right, let's make it bigger. Okay. All right, so we pretty much did everything here. I also have this this picture of a goat. All right, I think I said something different, one semester, and that class just never let me have it. But essentially, I just want you guys to get an appreciation of any like mammal, animal, bears. They have similar anatomical terminology related to us, but based off of the orientation of their body, they may be located differently. So I'm just giving you a different perspective there. All right. Okay, I want you guys to stand in anatomical position. All right, now we're gonna test your, don't look at this. Ask one of your partners to engage in forearm supination, forearm supination. Forearm supination. Let's go forearm pronation, forearm pronation.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so we'll get there. All right, you guys, so palmar is the palmar aspect of your hands. This is primarily only referring to the hand. The dorsal and the plantar aspect, again, the dorsal is the back. However, when you look down, the dorsal aspect is actually the first thing you see. All right, and this kind of makes sense because you guys are familiar with dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. right? So dorsiflexion simply means that you're flexing on the dorsal aspect. All right, on the plantar side, plantar flexion, you're flexing on the plantar side. All right, so pronation and supination, again, is just another way that we can engage in internal and external rotation. You can apply this primarily on the distal aspects of your body. So primarily the forearm, hand, and the lower aspect of your lower leg and feet, all right? And we'll get into the specifics here when we get into pronation and supination of the foot, particularly because that involves a combination of more simple things about the foot. Anything medial is closer to the midline. Another synonymous term with that is proximal. All right. Same thing, anything lateral is away from the midline of the body. Another term for that can be distal. All right, again, this is important whenever you have a reference point. So you can't really use these terms if you don't have a particular reference point. A reference point typically in the musculoskeletal world is typically like a joint, all right? So anything, any architecture, any bone feature, any muscle feature related to that joint, it'll be described in these terminologies. Lastly, I gave you pretty much a list of all of the terminology that you typically see. And you can use this on your exam and also kind of have this as your little cheat sheet. All right. Any questions, comments, concerns, you can actually have a seat now. Appreciate you. All right. Also, I know this is a review. I'm doing this just to keep you awake, and it's working, right? All right, and after we get through with this, we'll play a little game of Simon Says. All right, we'll play a game of Simon Says, but I'll add some caveats to that, all right? And I need some helpers, and my helpers will automatically get 1 point on your exams. Giant shirt, you're my helper, automatically. All right, so let's review the planes of motion again. Guys, don't get confused here because based off of the source material that you use, there's different names and it's extremely confusing. Everything I'm about to tell you right now is the nomenclature that is typically used, but again, don't be discouraged if you see any of these other nomenclatures in the parentheses, all right? So again, whenever a joint engages in a movement, we move on a plane about a particular axis, all right? So on a plane and a particular joint rotates about a particular axis. Axis. All right, so we all know the sagittal plane. Other names are outlined there. And this is the plane that flexion and extension typically occurs. All right, so I want everybody to imagine that you guys are in this narrow hallway. All right, so I want everybody to imagine that you're confined in this hallway. All right, now give yourself some space. Now in this hallway, I want you to engage in a movement that you're allowed to do in this hallway. You guys aren't moving. What are we doing? That you can't move like that, man.
Can't move like that?
You can't move like that. The hallway is this way, so imagine that you're confined.
Okay.
All right, I want you guys to realize what kind of movements you guys are doing, right? What plane are you moving about from, right? Everybody's engaging in either shoulder flexion, shoulder extension, elbow flexion, knee flexion, knee extension, right? All right, now I want you guys to think of the wall that you're moving about from, right? That's your sagittal planes, okay? Main movements here is flexion and extension. Now, the movement where abduction and adduction occurs is about the frontal plane. Oh, I almost forgot one thing. Also, a lot of students get confused with the planes and the corresponding axis. All right. It's very, very simple. Each plane has a particular axis. So once you know the plane, you automatically know the axis, all right? So the sagittal plane corresponds to the frontal horizontal axis. I've also seen frontal axis. An axis, I want you guys to think of like a pole that is going straight through a particular joint. All right, and the joint is rotating about that axis. So movement occurs about a plane, rotating about a particular axis. So if you know any movement that's occurring in the sagittal plane, you already know that a particular joint is moving around the frontal axis. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so once you know the plane, you know the axis. So in the frontal plane, movements or joints rotate about the sagittal horizontal axis, also known as the sagittal axis. All right, so if you guys know between the frontal and sagittal planes, the axis is just flipped. All right. All right, so again, imagine now this time that you're confined a hallway like this. All right. Can you flex and extend in this hallway? All right, so engage in movements that you're able to move in that hallway. Shoulder abduction. Okay, horizontal flexion and extension, we're kind of getting somewhere, okay? So also, you guys can also engage in flexion and extension actions about this plane. The only difference is the movement still has to occur on the frontal axis. Does that make sense? Students get confused, but don't get confused when you see the term horizontal shoulder flexion or some terms like that, and it's not occurring in the sagittal plane. Just know that the joint is flexing and extending. The plane is just different than what it's typically associated to. Does that make sense? So a prime example of that will be the shoulder joint during a bench press, right? Or let's say the elbow joint during a bench press, right? Movement is occurring about that frontal plane, but there's still flexion and extension occurring about the elbow joint, right? But however, we're not doing it here in the sagittal plane, we're actually doing it in the frontal plane. So in those type of situations, to fix the terminology, individuals just decided to place a horizontal in front of the word, right? So any flexion and extension actions occurring about the frontal plane, by and large, is the name of that movement will be horizontal flexion and horizontal extension. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, again, this is just terminology particularly related to the CSCS exam. By show of hands, how many of you guys are interested in taking that exam? CSCS exam, right? Okay, this class for the most part is mainly taught for that. But I also want you to get an appreciation of like, there's a lot of ambiguous terms that's also used in that space as well. All right, so last of the cardinal planes will be the horizontal or transverse plane, all right? So I want everybody to imagine that you're in this tight tube. All right? So there's a circular tube surrounding your body. What are some movements that you can do? Okay. That's wrist flexion and extension, that's not fair, right? There's a lot of internal and external rotation occurring, right? If we're standing in anatomical positions, and let's assume that like you also have tubes in your arms as well, right? And what kind of motions are we doing there? Pronation, supination, internal, external rotation, right? All right, so a lot of our rotation movements occur about this plane, and it rotates about a particular vertical axis, all right? If you guys don't know, all the axes that corresponds to these planes are perpendicular, like as in 90 degrees, to the plane of motion. All right, I give you guys some nomenclature here, and I give you also a table just to refer back to. All right, the last of the planes, which is more as like an end all be all, is this oblique plane. So if you really want to get particular, any sequential movement can occur about a particular plane. All right. And if it doesn't fit into those three cardinal planes, by and large, it fits into some sort of a diagonal plane architecture. And because of that, the axis would just be 90 degrees to that particular plane of motion. All right, and this can be either uniaxial or multi-axial. All right, I believe we explained all this again. I'm also giving you some high key definitions that you'll typically see on these exams. Again, this should be a review and you guys can refer back to this recording. All right, let's we already ran over this. Circumduction is particular movements that you see in like your typical saddle joints. So the thumb is one, depending on the text that you refer to, the shoulder could potentially be another one. All right, but everything else we already reviewed. You guys like my little supination and forearm? You guys don't care. All right, also for the internal and the external rotation actions, I want you guys to make sure that you guys are looking at the actual bone to bone movement and not the limb. All right, so there is some aspects in the human body, which I'll touch on those particular examples, that it may be confused as to why one movement is denoted as internal or external rotation, or why a particular muscle, causes a particular movement. And just know that we're mainly talking about the bone to bone articulation as opposed to the limb itself. All right, but these last set of terminology is more specified and specific about a particular reason. You guys are all awake, which is actually great, man. Usually I start losing people, but all this refers to mainly one example, right? So opposition and reposition is typically actions of the thumb moving towards the fingers and away from the palm of the hand. Protrusion, retrusion is mainly referring to the mandibular joint, which we'll discuss more in the online lecture in a couple weeks. Everything else here refers to the movement about your scapula. All right, we'll have a very in-depth in-person lecture about the scapula, just because I think it's very important for me to give that lecture in person so you guys can appreciate the architecture there, because movements about the scapula directly implicate movements about the shoulder, right? And if you guys refer to the lecture last week, the shoulder joint, the actual bone-to-bone articulation there is relatively weak. So it relies on the dynamic support of the surrounding structures, primarily the muscles, all right? So we'll touch on there, but protractor, retraction, elevation, depression, upper rotation, and downward rotation, it just refers to the movement about the scapula. Please make sure to just be familiar with these concepts. There may be examples on the exam where I show a picture just like this. I just want you guys to identify what I'm looking for. It's very easy. Again, the exam is just to prep us for the forthcoming lectures, all right? Lastly, I gave all this for you as a template to refer back to if you guys are working in clinicals or studying for an exam and don't want to Google up these terms, whatever. All right, all this is outlined for you. All right. Wow, we're already done. Let's take a short break. And then we're gonna play Simon Says for extra points. And it's not, I promise, it's not whack, it's not lame. Cause I almost assure you, over and under, I think maybe 10 of you guys will receive the points. You guys know how to play Simon Says, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just can't like mess up. Or like.
Let me enlighten you guys. Alright, so you don't move unless Simon Says, right? Now there's a caveat here. We're gonna play Simon Says with anatomical movements, alright? But not only do you have to listen, if Simon is telling you, you'll have to do the actual right movement. Okay? I know what you're thinking, oh, this is easy, this is easy, I promise you, it's not. Any small little movement, you're gone, you're out of there, alright? My suggestion to you. If you don't hear the word Simon, just don't move. Alright? And I'm gonna start light, yes.
So like if you move right out.
Yes. It's not, so. Let's see, I'm gonna have one individual that will be my judge for each row. No, not Alright, I know my man in the Giant shirt, just because he got the Giant shirt on, like, I just have to do it. Have to
So
do it.
he is the automatic person for our row.
He's an automatic person for these two rows.
Alright, I'm judging him. I got it.
Alright, see. You. Yeah, you'll be my judge for these two rows. So the judges have to do absolutely nothing. Besides watching the individuals like a hawk, alright? Ah, jeez. Who's avoiding like? I mean, I can judge. No, I like seeing the whole class. Alright,
I do it.
so I want you to look at all three rows,
All three rows, okay.
all three rows,
Big
alright?
responsibility.
It's a big responsibility. Once my man comes back, we'll get started. Everybody will start in anatomical position. The rules are as follows, alright? For example, if I say, Simon Says right elbow flexion, and you stay there, alright? If I say, Simon Says return to anatomical position, you know what to do, alright? It's very simple. All I have is 10 to 15 instructions. If you make it through, you earn 2 extra points on your exam. 2 extra points. Man, when I say extra points, it's like crap to you guys. Like, I get it. It's the game. I understand. Okay, I got the recording on, so I don't know if I'm gonna crop that out because I'm lazy, so it is what it is. So yeah, we'll wait for this individual and then we'll get started. After this, I have a small little interactive activity which goes really over the planes of motion, open chain and closed chain stuff, as well as some levers, all right? So the concepts that will be asked for you guys during the first exam, all right? So again, it's not meant to trip you up. The goal is to just apply some real, and by real, I mean like resistance training-esque examples for you guys to engage with, all right? All right, let everybody stand up for me. I want my judges. You know, stand right here. Congratulations, you just earned 1 point on your exam. You earned 1 point, you almost didn't want to do it. So earn 1 point. Everybody who earned points, please make sure to send me a message on web courses. Let me get your name. Dylan. Andrea. CJ. All right. It's not even like you're. But let me tell you, you're facilitating learning. Right? You're. It's almost like a coach, man. Like, come on, you're trying to help these individuals get better. I'll say it again. It's not like, okay, let me stop. Actually, let me stop the recording. Individuals on Zoom, I apologize. You're not gonna have as much. All right, wasn't that fun, guys? Yeah. Yeah. We will do another interactive activity. All right, so all this is more, I guess, practical applications. And a lot of these concepts we covered during the last two class periods, and this will be on your exam, okay? Again, the reason why we're doing this is I want you guys to get a nice foundation of open chain and closed chain movements. Leverage systems, because I refer to those often during the lectures. Okay, we'll see if I just want to throw out more bonus points because of it. All right. Example number one. Is this an open chain or a closed chain? For open chain, raise your hand. For open chain, raise your hand. All right, let's I'll be more specific about the knee joint. Open chain or closed chain, open chain or closed chain. For open chain, raise your hand. Individuals on Zoom, you're more than welcome to. Closed chain, raise your hand, closed chain. Excellent, excellent. About the knee joint, this is a closed chain movement. Why is it a closed chain movement?
It's on the next surface.
It's on a fixed surface, right? So the distal bone articulation, which is the tibia, is moving considerably less than the femur. If you guys remember back to the arthrokinetic movements, the spinning, the gliding, the rolling, which bone is primarily engaged in those movements? In this example, is it the femur or the tibia? That's engaged in those arthrokinetic movements during the. For femur, raise your hand, raise them high. For tibia, raise your hand. All right, the answer is the femur, because the femur is more movable. All right, in this example, in closed chain. Does that make sense? All right, guys, for your CSTS exam, they really love open chain, closed chain. They love, this is a movement, which, which lever is this? All right, leverages are, it's tricky because you have to consider a couple different things. One is obviously the origin and insertion point of the muscles that surround the particular joint. And two, and most importantly, is whether it's engaged in eccentric or concentric contractions, because that's also important. And we'll touch on that here a little bit. All right. About the knee joint. Open chain or closed chain? For open chain, raise your hand. For closed chain. For closed chain, raise them high, raise them high. So about the knee joint, the distal portion is freely movable. So this is knee extension in open chain, knee extension in open chain. Again, guys, this is very important because when we're referring to like pathology of an injury, it doesn't really matter necessarily. It does to an extent, like the excessive moment about a particular joint, but based off of, whether that injury has manifested in an open chain and closed chain perspective, you automatically know, okay, which muscles or structures are mostly compromised. Does that make sense? So this really, understanding this can really inform the next steps in your clinical care down the line. Okay, guys, about the elbow joint, is this open chain or closed chain? For open chain, raise your hand. About the elbow joint, for open chain, raise your hand. About the elbow joint. For closed chain, raise your hand. For closed chain. All right, this is elbow flexion in open chain, open chain. So I want you guys to consider the articulation of the elbow joint. Do you guys know which two bones primarily make up the elbow joint? You guys will learn this, but
I know.
the humerus and not necessarily, it's the ulnar, actually, right? Or the cranial process of the ulnar. Again, you guys will, you guys will learn this, but I'm saying this because whenever movement is an open chain, the most distal bone is moving the most. All right? So in this example, which bone is moving the most in that elbow articulation? It's the ulnar, right? Yeah, don't get confused with this. A lot of individuals get confused, which is why I'm going over this now. More practical examples, so you guys can kind of get an idea, right? If the bone, the distal aspect of the bone is moving the most, 9 times out of 10 is open chain. Right? Let's consider, what is this? The right knee. Open chain or closed chain? For open chain, raise your hand. For closed chain, raise your hand. Yes, this is a closed chain movement, all right? The distal aspect is mostly stable because it's on a fixed surface. All right, let's consider the elbow joint here. Open chain or closed chain? For open chain, raise your hand. Open chain, raise your hand. For closed chain. Excellent. Why is it closed chain? Bar is not moving, exactly. The distal aspect is not moving. Now, elbow flexion is occurring about this exercise, right? I'll give you guys a little, I won't say tip. Individuals should know this, right? Have you ever seen like those male gymnasts?
Yeah.
Right? Like they have some of the most biggest biceps, right? By and large. Pull-ups especially, yes, it's supposed to be a back dominant muscle, right? Or back dominant movement. But if you really want to work your biceps, you can change the orientation of your body and only focus on contracting your biceps. Right? Now, yes, from the individual back there is referring to a chin up, right? For your biceps brachii, typically you want your forearms in a supinated position. All right, that will invoke mostly the biceps brachii. Now, if you reverse your hands on a pronation aspect, the biceps brachii is actually not as active. There's other muscles that cross the elbow joint, like the brachioradialis, like the brachialis, that are more implicated for those movements. And your bicep, although they're also working, there may be an argument there that you're applying more mechanical tension during a pull-up. And this is for the biceps brachii. By and large, for strength and hypertrophy, the number one thing that you want out of anything is some form of mechanical tension. All right. To gain appreciation in strength, I say more so strength than hypertrophy, but that's a exercise phys related question. But either way, if you want to improve muscle performance in general, make sure that you put your body in an orientation or your muscle in an orientation that allows for a decent amount of maximal mechanical tension. All right, okay, let's go. Let's see. I want you guys to analyze this full movement. And I want you to compare this to like a push-up that's down on the ground. Based off of that example, is this an open chain or a closed chain movement? For open chain, raise your hand. Closed chain, raise your hand. All right, let's refer to the elbow joint. And now we're kind of transitioning more so towards full body movements, right? Comparing an exercise like a bench press versus a push-up, right? The differences of the paradigm there is that a push-up is typically done on a fixed surface. All right. The weight here on the distal aspect is what we categorize as freely movable. I want you guys to compare this example to your leg extension versus your typical squat. Right? So there may be situations where a joint is not defined. From then on, you have to see, well, okay, is the bar or is the dumbbells on a distal aspect moving or not? All right, and from that perspective, you can also denote if it's open chain or closed chain. Yes.
So for. Which one? I'm trying to see if that one has been, open and closed. Some of the other legs are in the air, but you still press up against something.
Yeah, so if
The
you're
leg
referring to a
press.
leg press, yes, okay, so let's compare that. Is that an open chain or a closed chain? The leg press. Who said that? Right, because hypothetically, if that platform is fixed and the seat is moving, then that's a closed chain movement. But if you're moving the plate away from you, that's an open chain movement. Does that make sense? Yeah. So yeah, it's examples there, and you really have to be particular to how the movement is being done. That's a great question. All right. So by and large, again, individuals taking the CSCS exam, you guys will see situations like this. And a lot of times students will focus on the joint articulation and trying to find the example there. If you're getting stumped there, take a step back and see whether the barbell, the dumbbell, or the plate is moving on the distal aspect. All right, if that's moving, you know it's open chain. Okay, let's go to levers. Exactly. Bicep curl. It's a first, second, or third class lever. For first class, raise your hand. For second class, raise your hand. For third class, raise your hand. Yeah, we spoke about this. Why is this a third class lever? Anybody talk to me, why? You had to raise hand, why? And I need particular answers, and it better include muscle insertion points.
So the fulcrum is the elbow.
Yes,
And then the bicep is kind of like in front of the elbow.
yes,
And the weight, the load is at the wrist.
right, so that's the resistance. Again, if you're looking at the muscle architecture, individuals will typically see like, okay, the force that we're producing is here in the biceps. And the biceps here is between, or is in front of the elbow, right? And because the elbow is here and the weight is here, it's a first class lever. Not so fast, right? I'll reiterate what we spoke on last week. We really have to pay attention to the insertion points of the muscles. It's only at the insertion point where the force is applied, particularly the line of pull of that particular muscle, all right? So because the biceps brachii, the tendon articulates or attaches at the radial tuberosity, it goes past the elbow articulation. So actually, the point of the force is past the elbow joint. Does that make sense? And then outside of that, everything else is just a lever system. you're comparing the point of the force of application to the moment arm of the resistance. And whichever moment arm is longest, you know that has the most leverage, right? Again, you typically see the third class orientation in your distal joints, so your elbows and your knees particularly. And we operate at a mechanical disadvantage because of it, because our force producing capability does not have as much leverage as the resistance. Okay, I want you guys to consider the whole example, all right? So not joint specific. Calf raises. Is this a first, second, or third class lever? I want you guys to pay attention here. The axis of rotation will be here. All right, so based off of that, is this a first, second, or third class lever? For second, raise your hand. Raise them high, raise them high. For third, raise your hand. I don't know what the hell you're talking about, raise your hand. All right. There's also scenarios here that you can be asked, based off of the movement example, what kind of leverage system is this, right? I want you guys to think about like a wheelbarrow, for example, right? You know, the weight is being applied, farthest away from the point of the rotation of the axis to allow our force producing capabilities to have more leverage. In this case, the axis of rotation in the calf raise is right along the toes. So there's a couple things here that you have to consider. One, which muscle is causing the calf raise? Gastroc, the calves, right? Where's the calves located? All right, so for our calves, is that our force or is that the resistance? If it's a muscle, that's our force, right? So we have two of the three things that we need. We have the axis of rotation and we have the force that's being applied, right? So the resistance in this case corresponds to the center of mass, all right? And in this case, it would actually be right in front of the gastroc and the soleus. So because of that orientation, it would be a second class. All right, I want you guys to understand, because you can look this up and it'll tell you, okay, this is a second class. But why is it a second class? All right, if we have the point of application here, and we have the center of mass, which is serving as our resistance, because gravity is acting on us, in between the axis of rotation and the application of our force, which entity has more leverage, our force or the center of mass? Which entity has a larger moment arm? The force, all right? So in the second class orientation, our ability to produce force is magnified. We have more leverage based off of that. So it's relatively easier for us to displace ourselves in this orientation, which is why in the second class orientation, our muscles is operating at a mechanical advantage. All right. Is this a first, second, or third class lever? For first class, raise your hand. For first class, raise your hand. And remember, we're going about the knee and the elbow are organized in a pretty similar manner. Is this a second class lever? Raise your hand for second class. Raise your hand for third class. Excellent. Can somebody explain to me why this is the third class lever? Anybody? Yes.
So the joint is obviously the knee,
Mhm.
so the muscles attach just past the joint,
Mhm.
and then the weight is all the way at the end.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes, so the the patella bone. Transitions the forces produced by the quadriceps. To the tibial tuberosity via the patella ligament. Right, which crosses the knee joint articulation there. Yes,
So I always thought that the third class was like the effort is in the middle, if it's starting from the, if it's, is it starting from the knee or is it ending at the knee?
repeat that question one more time.
So I always thought like the third class, like the effort is in the middle, so is it starting from the knee or is it ending? in the knee?
Yeah, so the effort in that case refers to the point of insertion of our muscle.
Okay.
So that is in the middle between the axis and the external resistance. Because it just crosses the knee joint. So it's the same idea. Just like the elbow. Because hypothetically, if I just look at the elbow from the anatomical perspective. A lot of individuals think that this is a first class orientation because the muscle belly is right up here. The axis is here and the resistance is here. So our effort, a lot of individuals would think is before the axis and the axis is in the middle. But our effort is always placed upon the insertion of that muscle. So the same thing with our vastus group. Even though our main architecture is located in the upper thigh region, the point of application, our effort is realized at the tibial tuberosity, which is past the knee joint articulation. And this is why we operate at a mechanical disadvantage. Simply because if you compare the moment arms, right, the perpendicular distance between our effort and the external resistance, the perpendicular distance of the moment arm between our effort and that axis is right here, right? If you compare that to the huge moment arm that is realized about our external load, but the moment arms are drastically different there. So in order for us to move a relatively light external load, we have to produce a lot of force within our muscle tissue. And it's all based off of a lever system, right? And I'm speaking in terms of relative, it can be a relatively light load. It can be like 5 kgs, for example. But remember, for torque and levers, the resistance that we're actually experiencing is multiplied by that moment arm. Does that make sense? So there's always two components that we're addressing here in terms of leverages. And it's always comparing, okay, once I multiply the force or the resistance, whatever value that is, if I multiply that by the moment arm based off of the length of the actual rotation, then I know which entity has more leverage. Does that make sense? All right, last example, I want you guys to consider the full example. Is this a first, second, or third class lever? The axis of rotation is here. Center of mass will be somewhere here. The point of our effort is right around the chest. For first class, raise your hand. For second class, raise your hand. For third class, raise your hand. All right, so in movements like this, when you have no weight, the application of the resistance is generally around the center of mass of that object. All right. Okay, that is all I have. Exam 1 will cover all of the basic terminologies as well as those examples. And again, exam 1 shouldn't be that difficult. It's just to kind of set the table up so you guys can digest the information moving forward. Any questions, comments, or concerns? Yeah.
What would be like considered a first class lever if you're talking about like
That's a great question. The first class levers. A couple examples in the body is like. Particular muscles in the skull and like the neck region. But for the elbow. Because of the muscle architecture. It can pretty much be a third class lever, however. And like I didn't really touch on this, but it's worth mentioning. All the movement that we considered was done concentrically, right? So if we ever consider, well, you know, what if I do elbow extension eccentrically, right? How would I categorize that? And for eccentric examples, the rule of thumb, by and large, that orientation will become a second class orientation. Only because the effort and the resistance is flipped. And the rationale there is during eccentric movements, we're able to resist external loads a lot more efficiently there. And this is from a biomechanical perspective, CSCS stuff. They like that answer, pretty much. I don't know what else to say outside of that. Any other questions?
What
Yes,
was the answer for the last one when you were asking about the lever for the push-up? Which one was that?
yeah, so that would be a second class. Second class, because the force in relation to the axis, which is around the toes, the moment arm there is greater than the moment arm of the center of mass. Any other questions? All right, you guys, so for individuals who won for Simon Says, don't forget to message me, because I won't forget. And that's it, so no class next week. Exam 1 will open, you'll take that. And then I don't think we meet the following week, because that's the first lecture on the head and neck,
September 20th, right?
September 20th, yeah, and I can actually look
Remember
up.
that on the island.
Yes, all right. So also, I want you guys to pay attention real quick. So for any lecture, whether it's delivered online or in person, you'll typically have a couple quizzes to do. You'll have a bony anatomy quiz, which is just labeling the noted bony features of our joint region. And then after that, you move on to the muscle and then the lecture, all right? How I suggest is either while you're watching it or before you take the lecture, take these first. And you may take them a couple times, right? Like I get it, if you guys just wanna, you know, get it through, you can get it through. But make sure that you're pretty familiar with where the anatomical structures are before you take the lecture quiz. All right, you guys are dismissed. I appreciate your attention. I'll see you guys in a couple weeks. Right, oh.
Got a quick question.
See-
Do the judges get an extra point too?
Yes, yes, they do.